Hello everyone, and welcome to Anomalous Archive, where we post scary stories to help you sleep. Please comment where you are listening to my videos from, since I believe it would be fun for all of us to know. Also, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's reach 50 subscribers until the end of this month. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I recently got a job at a local Kentucky Fried Chicken. Of course, I didn't want to work, but my mother kept insisting and nagging me to get off my ass and earn a living. I live in a small town in Australia and am surrounded by dense bush. This Kentucky Fried Chicken is very similar to a McDonald's because it has a drive-through and, in addition to burgers, it also sells fried chicken wings. The Kentucky Fried Chicken has a special story because the local community did not want it to be built there, as it stands on an old site that is dear to the whole town. I wasn't sure what was there, as I had only recently moved to the area, but the signs and protests were still there, even though the store had opened 4 years ago. After I started working, I was immediately trained in all the important areas: serving customers, working the drive-in, flipping the patties, frying the chicken wings, and making a damn good cup of coffee. I got along well with most of my colleagues and even went on a date with one of the pretty coworkers. After I had been working for about a month, a branch manager approached me and asked if I would be interested in working the night shift, the most boring time of the night when the store, except for the drive-in, would be closed and I would have to stand alone in the store all night since it wasn't very busy. Well, I gratefully accepted because I needed the money to go out with friends, and so I was assigned to the night shift the following week. Like any sensible person, I went for a run, had something to eat, and took a shower before putting on the work clothes I would have to wear for the next 9 hours. I got into my car and drove the 10 minutes to my workplace. There I got out and entered. The closing staff greeted me before I wrote down my tasks and got to work. The list was as follows: make the dining area spotless, mop the floor, check the inventory of the kitchen and the snack bar. That was actually the usual, plus the additional tasks of emptying the trash cans and cleaning the bathroom. I went down to the locker room, hung up my jacket, put on my apron, and started my shift. Then I watched as the closing team left our little building, got into their cars, and drove away. I was alone. With a sigh, I went into our small laundry room to get the mop and fill it. The slow movement of the water began to irritate me, as it took forever to fill the bucket. The light in the room flickered, and I swear I saw a figure out of the corner of my eye. I blinked, and it was gone. It must have been my mind playing tricks on me. When it was over, I went to the food area and made sure all the doors were locked. I mean, who wants someone coming into their clothes store at night, especially in an area known for having a lot of addicts? As I dragged the mop to the center of the small dining room, I heard the familiar sound of a printer in the manager's office. As I approached the small windowed door, I noticed that the light in the room was off, but the computer screen was on, casting a faint bluish light into the dimly lit room. I opened the door, its metal knob icy cold, and turned on the light as I entered the cramped space. Was this supposed to be an office? More like a storage room. Well, I wasn't completely surprised when I found a sheet of paper neatly placed in the printer tray. On the paper, a kind of list was printed in black ink. When I looked closer, I could see that this list contained a kind of rules. I took the paper from the drawer, which was still warm from the printing, and as the paper fluttered in my hands, a breeze wafted towards me, bringing with it strange but fitting citrus notes to my nose. I never brought it to my face and read the page. 1. If you hear a knocking on doors and windows, turn off all the lights. Otherwise, stay under the counter until it stops. 2. If the temperature drops drastically, check the thermostat, and whatever you do, don't look behind you. 3. If the light in the manager's office starts to flicker, cover the window and the door, close the door, and stand still for 30 seconds. 4. If you hear sobbing from the bathroom, take a look. If it turns into a whimper, it's already too late. 5. If you see a woman on the other side of the street, Do not stop looking at her until you hear a tapping on the wall behind you. 6. If music starts playing from the loudspeakers, hide in the freezer until it stops. 7. If you receive a call from someone you know, don't answer it, otherwise they will be the next. 8. If you take the trash out and see that the bins are open, run back inside and don't go out for the rest of the night. 9. If you hear light breathing over the headset for the drive-in, turn off the headset and run to the restrooms. Was that a joke? A stupid prank the manager came up with to scare me out of the building on my first night shift? Nice try, I scoffed, looking towards the camera nearest to me and turning it off. Without thinking further, I threw the paper into the trash and cursed the time wasters. That cost me 5 minutes of my shift, 5 minutes less to get my work done. I returned to my mop and began cleaning the floors. They were full of mud because there had recently been a thunderstorm, and people are so inconsiderate, not wiping their shoes on the conspicuous doormats before entering. Assholes. As I approached the restrooms, I had the feeling of being watched. You know how it is, the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and you feel uneasy. I turned around and scanned the room as the patter of rain began. After I had glanced around briefly, I turned back to my mop, picked it up, and continued cleaning. However, as I approached the bathroom door, I heard a faint sobbing. That scared me. I hadn't expected that. The whole time I thought I was alone in the store. I called through the closed door and asked if anyone was in the room, but I received no answer. Then I asked again, and as before, I got no response. So I slowly opened the door. As I entered the small bathroom with just one toilet, I looked around and noticed two important details. The crying had stopped, and there was no one there. Uncanny. The rain grew stronger. The sounds echoed off the metal roof, and I left the bathroom, eager to finish mopping and disappear from the bathroom for the rest of the night. Something seemed off to me. Didn't the list mention something like that? I ran back to the trash can where I had thrown the letter and rummaged through it to check the rules again. After I took the paper out of the trash can, I read it again, and lo and behold, there was rule number 4. A moment later, I walked away from the trash can. If this is a joke, then it is very well thought out. I shouted to the empty store that whoever was trying to mess with me should come out and show themselves, but I got no response. I went back to my mop and cleaned the store. After I was done, I went to the vending machine and got a Coke, a refreshing drink after this physical work to reward myself for the good job. While I was drinking, I looked over my other tasks for the evening and crossed the floors off the list. I decided to take out the trash because it would be relatively easy. As I checked off my list of tasks again, still holding the drink in my hand, I began to have breakfast. Since I live in a relatively cold area, I was used to the temperature drops, especially at night. I wanted to put on my jacket, but when I did, I saw my reflection on the floor. But it wasn't my reflection that sent a chill down my spine. Directly behind me, where the vending machine stood, there was a woman. She was wearing a torn dress and had long hair. She was light blue, and through the reflection, I couldn't make out her facial features. I was just about to turn around to confront the person behind me when I glanced at the notes I had left on the counter next to me. It seemed as if the rules were trying to etch themselves into my memory. Suddenly, it became clear to me. Didn't it get relatively cool quickly? Hastily, I reached for the list of rules, and there it was, rule number 2. I looked at the reflection of what was behind me. It had come closer. I jumped up and dashed to the thermostat in the middle of the dining hall. I almost slipped on the floor while doing so. When I arrived, I dared to take a look at the temperature. Suddenly, as if it had always been there, I felt the icy breath of the thing on my neck. Instinctively, I began to turn my head, but I forced myself to stare at the thermostat. I stood there paralyzed like a deer in headlights until I slowly, very slowly, felt an icy hand sliding up my arm. When it reached my bicep, the whisper-soft touch stopped, and I felt the sharp pain of fingernails digging into my skin. "Why don't you look at me?" The voice came from the left, and I could feel the gentle breath as she leaned closer. Was the voice real, or just in my head? No! I managed to pull myself together and squeezed my eyes shut as the fingernails dug deeper into my skin. Suddenly, she was gone. It felt like an eternity until I finally mustered enough courage to turn around again. I examined my arm. To my absolute horror, there was nothing to be seen. No pain, no pronounced crescent-shaped wounds on my skin. Absolutely nothing. I ran my hand over my face and turned back to the thermostat. My hand trembled as I quickly set it to 23 degrees. How can a thermostat be set to such low temperatures, let alone -4? As I turned back to the reassuringly empty store, I was left with more questions than I had hoped for. Two thoughts crowded my mind. What was that? And who set the thermostat? I started to laugh nervously. Maybe the night shift was getting to me. I mean, I did mention those addicts earlier, didn't I? Keeping an eye out for them must have gotten on my nerves. It was the only thought I could cling to so that it wouldn't drive me insane. I looked at the clock and hoped for the relief that I was almost done, but it was 11:11 p.m. Only an hour had passed since I started. I was nervous. I needed fresh air. Hadn't I said that I would take out the trash? I opened the back door and took out one of the 3 trash cans. Then I walked to the trash can. My breath was visible in the cool night. I opened it and took out a garbage bag. When I pulled the bag out of the bin, I muttered quietly to myself that some idiot hadn't tied the bag properly. I didn't clean that up. I threw the rest of the bag into the trash can and turned around to get another one. There I saw her. She was there again, but this time on the other side of the street. I couldn't make out her features, but I felt her cold gaze pierce through my soul. Without hesitation, I blinked to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. When I opened my eyes, she was still there, but this time she was a bit closer. Slowly, calmly, she raised her hand and began to wave, mocking me. I started to freak out. What the hell is going on here? As I stared at the place where I suspected her face to be, I was startled by a knock behind me. I turned around, only to see that there was a huge handprint on the wall. Quickly, I turned around again to see the thing on the other side of the street. It was gone. I immediately closed the trash can and ran inside. I left the bin outside. I didn't want to spend any more time outside, at least not at the moment. Then I started to wander back and forth along the counter. Why did this happen? Who had sent these rules to the printer? I took off a headset and slammed it on the counter. What should I do now? I made sure once again that the doors were locked and could not be opened. Then I pulled out my phone and called the store owner to explain that something strange had happened and asked the manager to come earlier. Although it was already late at night and I didn't expect an answer anymore, I sighed when the voicemail picked up after the beep and asked me to leave a message. I told the answering machine to call me back as soon as possible and hung up. After that, I looked again at the rule sheet that was right in front of me. My heart began to race when I saw those rules 2, 4, and 5 were crossed out. By crossed out, I mean that someone had taken a marker and angrily scribbled over the page, destroying the neatly printed rules. I was startled by this sight. Who could have done this? Before I could think about it any further, I heard a lullaby over the loudspeakers. This song was something I had never heard before, and it sounded almost malevolent. The gentle female voice became increasingly aggressive the longer the song went on. I glanced at the rules and sought guidance. Rule number 6. If music is played over the loudspeakers, hide in the freezer until it stops. I rushed to the freezer and forgot to put on one of the warm jackets in front of it. As I stepped into the icy cold, I had the feeling that something was standing behind me in the doorway. I looked at the temperature display in the freezer to check how cold it was. Here it was -20 degrees. I could still hear the faint echo of the song outside the door, and I am ashamed to say that I didn't have the courage to go out, despite the cold that began to settle in my bones. My heart stopped as I could even hear it from inside the freezer. Someone was hammering against the windows. It sounded as if someone was throwing their entire weight against the window to break it. It got even worse because the song was still playing, even more aggressively than before. Suddenly, the list of rules came to mind, especially rule number 1, which reminded me that I should hide under the counter when it hammered on the windows. But I was in the freezer, waiting for the lullaby to stop. What was I supposed to do? Before I could think about it any further, I heard the glass shatter, and I made a decision. The song had finally taken on a calmer tone. I stormed out of the freezer and ran towards the counter. When I threw myself under the counter, I screamed in sheer terror when I realized I could no longer see outside because countless bodies were pressing against the glass. I call them bodies because that's exactly what they were. Under no circumstances can anyone tell me that they were living, breathing people. Their pale white skin was stretched tightly over their facial features. But that was not what scared me the most. Each of them, every single one of them, had a wide, toothy grin, but none of them had eyes. Instead, there were empty sockets where their eyeballs should have been, and yet I felt them staring at me. I hid under the counter for what felt like an eternity. The lullaby from the loudspeakers fell silent and was replaced by white noise. Then I lifted my weary head from under the counter and feared what I would see beyond my safe zone. But I saw nothing, absolutely nothing. Why is this happening to me? Slowly, I crawled out from under the counter and placed my trembling hands on the bench to stop them from shaking. When I looked at the small note, rules 1 and 6 were crossed out, leaving only rules 3, 7, 8, and 9. I flinched when I heard my phone buzzing on the countertop. It was the owner. I quickly picked up and started to explain what was going on, but hardly had I finished when the owner began to respond. Why? A bone-chilling scream followed, and the phone call was abruptly ended. The faint beep of the landline brought me back to reality. I put the receiver down again and realized my mistake as I watched rule number 1 slowly being crossed out, with the ink seemingly coming from nowhere. Immediately, I grabbed the piece of paper and read the remaining rules from the original 9. The rules that remained unmarked were rules 3, 8, and 9. I took another drink to calm my nerves and looked at the clock once more. It was 3:30 a.m. I just had to hold out for another half hour. Suddenly, it occurred to me that I had left the trash can outside in the rain. The janitor would kill me if the bin was full of water. I opened the back door again and slowly approached the trash can I had left outside. I had actually managed to empty it before I ran back inside. When I flipped the lid and closed the trash can, I saw that the trash can was open. Hadn't I closed it? When I ran back inside, I closed it again. But when I turned around to put the barrel away, I heard a terrible scream from inside the barrel. Oh shit. I turned around to face the trash can, but was stopped by the same icy breath on my neck. Then that voice rang out again. Look at me. I left the dumpster and sprinted to the back door, my footsteps on the asphalt growing faster and faster, followed by even faster feet. The scream grew louder and never left my ear. I reached the back door and slammed it shut, while on the other side a faint knocking could be heard. Let me in. I collapsed and slid down the door to the floor. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest, but I couldn't move. The shock eventually subsided as my mind began to race again. I could not possibly be imagining this. Why wasn't I warned that something like this would happen? Why does no one else know about it? What's really going on here? These 3 questions constantly ran through my mind. The knocking ceased, and an eerie silence remained, as if there should be sounds, but there were none. When had it stopped raining? Slowly, I got up, and my trembling hands barely helped me stand. Stealthily, I made my way to the front counter, eager to consult the list. If all the rules are gradually being eliminated, I only need to pay attention to the last ones. Or, as I approached the list, I felt the temperature in the room drop, not just by 1 or 2 degrees, but by at least 10, making the room feel like a freezer. When I looked at the list, Rule 8 was of course crossed out. Rules 3 and 9 remained. Drive-in and the manager's office. Right? I turned my head around to look at the manager's office. There was nothing unusual to see there. I looked at the image from the camera that was directed at the drive-in. Nothing there either. I let out a sigh of relief. Finally, something normal. I closed my eyes, giggled, and whispered softly, "Is that all you've got, monster?" That was a mistake. My phone rang. It was the owner again. In my haste, I forgot the previous call and answered, desperately trying to explain what had happened. When I was finished, white noise came through my phone into my ear, causing me to drop the phone on the counter. In the noise, I heard voices calling my name. I recognized those voices, my grandfather and my mother. Even crazier was that they were both at home and probably sleeping. Why could I hear them? But then I heard a third voice, speaking softly. "Come to us." Fear rose within me as I recognized the third voice. It was that woman, the one who had been terrorizing me all night. I picked up the receiver and desperately tried to hang up. The voices grew louder. "Come to us, come to us, come to us." Then I hung up. I managed to hang up the call and immediately let the phone slip into my pocket. Tonight, I wouldn't be taking any more calls. I sat on the counter and took a look into the kitchen. The UV light killed any pest that approached. I looked down at my feet. It seemed as if the bugs had had just as tough a night as I did. Then I heard a zap inside the quiet store, then another one, and another one. I looked up at the lamp again and heard another zap, but no insect was near the lamp. I looked around the store and tried to figure out where the noise was coming from. When I saw the manager's office, the light flickered. A few seconds later, I jumped down from the counter and sprinted to the door to try to cover the small window. But I had nothing. I was looking for something while locking the door and peering into the office. Why did I look into the office? Between the flickering lights, I saw the thing trying to claw its way out of the computer screen. Its face broke through the surface of the monitor and came into the real world. It stared at me. I broke his gaze and looked around for something to cover the small window. I needed something, anything, to cover it. Then I looked again, and his head was now out. He reached out a hand. I managed to catch a glimpse of myself in the window as I looked away. I was wearing my sweater. Yes, that's it. Immediately, I pulled it out and used it to seal the window, just in time to hear the loud crash of the computer monitor hitting the floor. I just had to stay here for 30 seconds. Then I would be safe. Then I heard it scratching at the window. It was slow and methodical, as if it were trying to play a terrible melody. I threw my weight against the door to stop the melody, but it only made it louder. In my head, I thought I didn't have much time left, and I kept the door shut. Suddenly, I heard a crash as a hand reached for me through the now broken window. "Come to me, come to me, come to me," chanted the creature as it groped for me. She found my face and grabbed it tightly. I freed myself from her grip, jumped back from the door, and let go of my sweater. When I looked back at the door, to where I had just been, I saw nothing. As I began to calm down, I heard the scratching of the paper, which meant there was only one rule left. Rule number 9, save the best for last. That's what I thought when I looked at the list. I was beside myself with excitement and started laughing. One more task. Bring it on. I shouted through the store, and like a cruel joke, I heard the ringing of someone in the drive-in. I picked up the headset, slapped it on my head, and asked, "What do you want, you monstrous bitch?" I can say with certainty that the person on the other end of the line was not at all pleased with this response. They drove off after calling me an idiot and turning their back on me. My first customers of the evening, my first chance to strike up a conversation with someone, were gone. I was angry with myself, slammed my fist on the table, and shouted a long list of curses. It was all that damn thing's fault. I looked at the last rule again, and my mind said screw it. Then I decided that I would confront the thing if it came through. I didn't care anymore, and as if on cue, I heard a faint breathing from the headset. I turned on the microphone and told the thing to get lost. Then I reached for the rules to cross the last one off. Suddenly, I was lifted up and thrown across the room into the kitchen. All the lights went out. Only the faint glow of the UV lamp remained. That's when I saw it too. When I looked at the rules to see if rule number 9 had been removed, I saw another rule disappearing from the page. It was as if someone had written it in invisible ink. Rule number 10, the rules lie. I looked up just in time to see the thing burst through the front door and charge at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. When it reached the entrance to the kitchen, I closed my eyes. I had lost. The light in the store flickered on, and I opened my eyes to see that the thing had disappeared. I looked over to the entrance and saw the store owner, who had a panicked, worried expression. He came over to me and told me that I was safe now and didn't have to worry. I think I fainted because when I came to, I was sitting in the back seat of Mom's car. When I woke up, I sat up and asked her what had happened. She told me that the store owner had called her to pick me up because I was catatonic and that she had rushed down to get me. A short time later, we arrived home and I collapsed on my bed. If I hadn't been so brave, I would probably be dead, or worse. As I thought about never working in a Kentucky Fried Chicken store again, I had to turn up the heat because it had really gotten cold in my house.